South African diplomat said on Tuesday that U.S. demands on domestic affirmative action policies, that's the BEE stuff I was talking about a little earlier, are complicating efforts to secure a trade deal. Now, the remarks come ahead of the imposition of a 30% tariff on South African exports to the U.S., which will effectively take effect from Friday. South Africa has tried for months to persuade the American president's administration to lower the tariff rate or exempt key industries in order to avoid hundreds of thousands of potential job losses. But South Africa has struggled to make headway, even as other economies like Japan and the European Union have struck deals with the White House.
Industry bodies as opposed to the government. As an example, citrus industry would want perhaps level tariffs on the basis that the season for citrus in the US versus South Africa is totally different. So there's no competition between these two industries. Instead, they are complementary to each other. And the auto industry has got its own complications because the owners of that industry are Europeans. It's not a South African industry, they operate from here. And that brings its own complications. So, but we do not have details of what is it exactly that South Africa is proposing. So we're stuck.
South Africa has quietly made a bold move that could reshape global trade, and the United States didn't see it coming. After months of high-pressure negotiations, the United States president pushed too hard, demanding concessions and setting strict political conditions that Pretoria simply couldn't accept. Now, South Africa is turning elsewhere, looking to China, BRICS partners, and alternative trade alliances that respect its sovereignty. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a signal that the Global South is asserting its independence, challenging decades of traditional influence. What does this mean for the United States' place in Africa? And could this signal a broader shift in global power? Stay tuned, because the world order is quietly changing, and South Africa is at the center of it.
The world is witnessing a quiet but profound shift in global trade and diplomacy, one that has unfolded largely out of the spotlight. South Africa, a long-standing partner of the United States, has begun charting a course that signals a recalibration of its economic and strategic alliances. Behind closed doors, negotiations that were supposed to strengthen ties between Pretoria and Washington have collapsed, leaving both sides recalculating their positions. For years, the United States applied increasing pressure on South Africa, demanding concessions, setting strict trade conditions, and signaling political expectations that stretched far beyond standard economic agreements. The result: South Africa began looking elsewhere, exploring partnerships that promised more respect for its sovereignty, greater flexibility, and a more balanced approach to trade. The breakdown did not happen overnight. For months, South African officials found themselves navigating a series of high-pressure discussions with the United States President's administration, where the terms of engagement often felt rigid, uncompromising, and at times, punitive. Washington's approach emphasized specific reforms and trade alignments, while hinting at political consequences if these were not met. South African diplomats, accustomed to careful negotiation, began to see a pattern. The United States was not merely seeking mutual trade benefits, but was attempting to shape Pretoria's broader domestic and foreign policies. Key moments during these negotiations illustrate why South Africa ultimately decided it could not meet United States expectations without compromising its autonomy. Several high-level meetings reportedly ended with stark differences over tariffs, market access, and investment conditions. While the United States president framed these demands as necessary to protect American interests and ensure fair trade, South African officials saw them as overreaching. Each proposal, carefully analyzed by Pretoria's economic and diplomatic teams, seemed to push the nation further into a corner. The turning point came when the United States presented a package that combined significant trade concessions with explicit political conditions. South African representatives were clear that while they valued a strong bilateral relationship, they could not accept terms that would interfere with domestic policy priorities, particularly in critical sectors such as mining, energy, and public investment. In private discussions, several South African negotiators reportedly expressed frustration that the United States seemed less interested in equitable partnership than in enforcing compliance with Washington's agenda. As tensions rose, South Africa quietly began exploring alternative avenues. China, already a major trading partner, offered more favorable terms, fewer political conditions, and opportunities for long-term investment in infrastructure, technology, and energy projects. Engagements with BRICS partners, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa itself, provided additional economic leverage, offering collaborative projects and access to a wider, multilateral trade network. Unlike the conditional frameworks presented by the United States, these options allowed South Africa to maintain greater control over its own policies while still pursuing economic growth and modernization. This pivot is part of a broader trend. Across the global South, nations are increasingly weighing their options beyond traditional alliances with the United States. Emerging economies are leveraging the rise of China, regional trade blocs, and new financial institutions to assert greater autonomy in global trade. South Africa's decision reflects both a practical economic calculation and a signal to Washington and other established powers. Excessive pressure and conditionality may produce diminishing returns, as nations seek partners who respect their strategic priorities. The economic calculus was straightforward. United States demands often required South Africa to open markets in ways that could disrupt local industries or compromise state-led development strategies. By contrast, Chinese investment and BRICS collaboration offered infrastructure projects, development financing, and market access without imposing direct political conditions. For a country balancing economic growth with social equity and domestic stability, the choice became increasingly clear. South African officials recognized that a more diversified trade strategy could reduce vulnerability to unilateral pressure, protect key industries, and allow the country to play a more influential role on the global stage. Diplomatic signals throughout this period were subtle but telling. Public statements emphasized the importance of sovereignty, mutual respect, and balanced partnerships. At the same time, behind the scenes, trade delegations engaged with a wide range of international partners, quietly negotiating projects that would advance strategic priorities while avoiding the pitfalls of excessive dependency. Observers note that these moves were deliberate and cautious, designed to preserve relationships with the United States while sending a clear message. South Africa would not be coerced into concessions that compromise national interest. The collapse of negotiations also highlights broader questions about the approach of the United States in international trade. While Washington has long promoted a vision of global leadership built on standards, regulations, and political influence, recent events suggest that rigid enforcement can sometimes alienate key allies. In South Africa, the combination of high demands and political undertones appears to have triggered a reassessment of priorities. Rather than doubling down on traditional partnerships, Pretoria opted to diversify and pursue options that allowed for greater strategic freedom. In practical terms, this shift has immediate implications for trade flows, investment, and regional influence. Chinese and BRICS involvement is accelerating projects in infrastructure, energy, and technology, which could reshape economic patterns across Southern Africa. South Africa's move also encourages other nations in the region to consider alternative trade arrangements, reducing reliance on any single global power. The United States, meanwhile, faces a more competitive landscape, where influence is no longer guaranteed simply by historical ties or economic leverage. From a geopolitical standpoint, the decision underscores a nuanced reality. Power in the 21st century is increasingly distributed. Nations like South Africa are no longer passive recipients of policy prescriptions from traditional powers. They are active architects of their own economic strategies. By seeking partnerships that offer flexibility, respect for sovereignty, and long-term benefits, South Africa signals a shift in how emerging economies engage with the world. This is not an abrupt rupture, but a measured realignment, with consequences that will reverberate across trade negotiations, regional politics, and global strategic calculations. Looking ahead, several dynamics are likely to shape the relationship between South Africa and the United States. Washington may need to reconsider its approach, balancing strategic goals with a recognition that overly rigid demands can drive partners into alternative alliances. For South Africa, the challenge will be to leverage new partnerships effectively, maintaining strong ties with established powers while maximizing benefits from emerging ones. The balancing act will define not only the nation's economic trajectory, but also its influence on the broader African continent and within multilateral frameworks. In the global context, South Africa's pivot reflects a wider pattern. Nations across the global south are asserting greater independence, challenging unilateral influence, and exploring diverse economic networks. From Latin America to Asia and Africa, governments are reassessing the costs and benefits of alignment with traditional powers, carefully weighing opportunities against political conditions and strategic constraints. The message is clear. Economic engagement can no longer be purely transactional. Respect for sovereignty, flexibility, and shared priorities have become essential prerequisites for sustainable partnerships. For the United States, the episode serves as a critical lesson. Pressure and conditionality may yield short-term compliance, but they risk long-term estrangement. In a world where alternative partnerships are increasingly viable, the balance between influence and respect is delicate. South Africa's recalibration demonstrates that even nations historically aligned with Washington will explore new avenues when they perceive their autonomy to be under threat. For South Africa, the immediate gains are tangible: expanded infrastructure investment, access to diversified markets, and partnerships that respect national policy frameworks. Beyond that, the move enhances strategic positioning, giving the country a stronger voice in regional and global forums. By diversifying alliances, South Africa is better equipped to navigate future economic uncertainty, strengthen domestic industries, and pursue policies aligned with long-term national interests. Ultimately, this quiet yet decisive shift signals a broader evolution in global trade and diplomacy. The United States may remain a critical partner, but the nature of engagement is changing. South Africa's choice underscores the importance of adaptability, respect, and strategic foresight in international relations. It demonstrates that influence is no longer a simple matter of historical ties or economic might. It is contingent on the ability to engage with partners in ways that recognize their priorities, preserve sovereignty, and offer genuine mutual benefit. As the world watches, the implications are clear. Trade negotiations will become more complex, alliances more fluid, and strategic partnerships increasingly multidimensional. South Africa's pivot is a bellwether, illustrating how nations can assert agency, diversify options, and redefine their role on the global stage. For Washington, it is a reminder that even the most established relationships require careful calibration, negotiation, and a willingness to adapt. For Pretoria, it is a demonstration of strategic pragmatism, a commitment to securing the country's economic future without sacrificing autonomy or long-term vision. The unfolding story between South Africa and the United States is emblematic of a world in flux. It is a story of calculated decisions, strategic realignments, and the subtle power of choice. In the end, the quiet decisions made behind closed doors may prove to be as consequential as the most visible diplomatic gestures, shaping trade, politics, and global influence for years to come.